welcome to our audience throughout the United States and throughout the world. I'm Michael Jenkins. I'm the president of the Washington Times Foundation, and we have a very special program day today called the Washington Brief. Our moderator is Ambassador Christopher Hill. Ambassador Hill was the former ambassador to Korea and has been an ambassador to several nations. He is the W. Ball Distinguished Adjunct Professor of International Affairs at the Columbia University School of Public Affairs. Also, as commentators on our panel will be Ambassador Joseph DeTrani. Ambassador DeTrani was former special envoy for negotiations with North Korea and director of National Counterproliferation Center. He was an associate director of national intelligence and the mission manager for North Korea. He's a veteran of Central Intelligence Agency and currently a professor at Missouri State University. Also, we have Professor Alexandre Mansourov. Professor Mansourov is an adjunct professor of security studies at the Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. He's an adjunct professor also at the International Studies at Johns Hopkins University and the Elliott School of International Affairs. Our special guest today is Mr. Sidney Seiler. Mr. Seiler is the National Intelligence Officer for North Korea at the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, was one of the senior experts who lent his expertise, specifically volunteering to support the U.S. forces in Korea, and the command's senior expert for North Korea from April 2016 to 2020. As a result of his service, February of this year, he received the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Distinguished Civilian Award. His career in intelligence spans over 30 years, and we welcome him today. I'd like to turn this over to Ambassador Christopher Hill, our moderator.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, let me thank Dr. Jenkins once again for this great Washington Brief, where we talk about some of the most challenging issues in East Asia, especially, of course, the hardy perennial of North Korea. And I think it's really a great opportunity to have Sid Seiler with us. Sid has a very recent experience dealing with the Trump administration on some of its efforts, but also it is also continuing to work on this very troubled issue, an issue that really doesn't appear to be heading toward a right direction at this point. And so let me maybe turn this over to Sid Seiler to give some opening thoughts. And then we will have a panel of Joe DeTrani and Alex Mansourov to pose some questions, and then we'll take it from there. So Sid, thank you so much for joining us. And I guess the real issue right now is we've had this review, and the question is really where it's going. We've had the Deputy Secretary of State, Wendy Sherman, visiting the region very lately. And now we have to see whether what lies ahead. Are we looking multilaterally? Are we looking more bilaterally, the kind of diplomacy that President Trump engaged in? Or is it going to be a sort of wait and see? So, Sid, I wonder if you can give some thoughts at this point, and then we can maybe pose some tough questions for you.
Thank you, Chris. It's an honor to be here. Dr. Jenkins, Washington Times Foundation, thank you for this opportunity. When we look at the North Korea issue, we often hear some angst and concern about how well we understand North Korea as we pursue whatever policy line that we pursue. And I always, with my roots in the intelligence community and having spent time here primarily analyzing, understanding North Korea for the last about 4 decades, and also spending time as a policymaker, as a negotiator, I've had a unique opportunity in which to kind of understand, what you could call the epistemological foundations for our policy. And I think this is a point that's often misunderstood in terms of, the fact that we've had a laser focus on North Korea as an intelligence target, as an issue of concern for the entire 68 years of the armistice ending the Korean War in 1953. We've now we've acquired some 30 years of experience in diplomacy with the North. We've learned a lot about their their negotiating style, what they're looking for, what they're willing to give up, and there's points of continuity are much greater than the points of departure in that regard, and I'll get to that. And then finally, we now have 10 years of observing Kim Jong-un and the direction Kim wants to take the country, what the opportunities he seized on, the opportunities he's walked away from. So I think when it comes to good policy toward North Korea, we have a really solid epistemological foundation. Our problems with North Korea are not due to an insufficient understanding or a lack of available knowledge upon which to build a good policy. Now, when I look at North Korea, particularly from my new position as a national intelligence officer, where, in the National Intelligence Council, we take a step back, an elevated strategic look at North Korea. I see strategic continuity over about 30 years in North Korea that helps. When you understand this, you can begin to understand the tactical developments or deviations from what appears to be a straight line projection, either a projection to some type of Armageddon-like outcome that we seem to be approaching in 2017, or some utopian diplomatic solution that we seem to be approaching in 2018. But when you look at these strategic lines of effort, you can begin to understand each and every data point that has unfolded since this issue initially came on everybody's radar. First line of effort for North Korea is obviously the securing of its strategic capabilities, whether it be the securing of the weapons usable fissile material. We know the history of the plutonium program, the history of the HU program, North Korea's development of missiles. But clearly, this has been an incremental but steady march toward a capability that is much more than a theoretical, maybe we've got 1 to 2 weapons worth of weapons grade material, which is what we faced prior to the agreed framework, to, maybe a test demonstrates a capability, but we still have time to resolve this in terms of that 2007, 2018 charge, Chris, that you led on the diplomatic side. Again, as we move through this, we know that the march toward the end state that North Korea has been seeking has been gradual, but relatively undeterred over time. The second line of effort has been diplomacy. And we see North Korea using diplomacy over that time period to buy time for the program, to exact concessions along the way, to mitigate internal difficulties, kind of see what they can acquire and achieve just simply by coming to the table, engaging in some type of negotiations for a while, maybe even coming to an agreement, whether it be a North-South agreement, the September 19th, 2005 joint statement, the leap day understanding of February 29th, 2012, and then breaking away, a way to exact concessions, mitigate pressure, but over time, eventually lock in their status and achieve international acceptance for it. The third line of effort has been towards the ROK. The DPRK had arguable political, economic, and military dominance on the peninsula following the war, and came to the table when it did from a position of strength. Since the early 1990s, that model has been turned on its head, but North Korea's goal with the ROK has been relatively consistent, which is gradually redefine the relationship with the South as one of a nuclear North Korea sitting across the table from a non-nuclear South Korea, to reestablish that dominance that it had in the 50s, 60s, and up to the 70s, maybe even early 80s. And of course, try to strain and eventually break US ROK cooperation on North Korea and the alliance itself. And then the fourth line of effort has been an internal line of effort, which has been to kind of muddle through, if we could call it that, not seek any major reform and opening of any type that would, re-engineer the political structure, the economic structure, or even the ideological beliefs of the system, but rather just to use various coping mechanisms to ensure regime survival through this period. When you begin to understand this fourfold kind of view of North Korea's lines of efforts, what we see unfolded since really the late 1980s makes a lot of sense. I like to say, for North Korea, the modern era begins around 1988, where, the South Korea's ascendance, South Korea's victory in that zero-sum game for diplomatic acceptance and recognition as the more legitimate, more successful model on the Korean Peninsula is evidenced in the 1988 Summer Olympics. From 1989 onward, you see a transformation of North Korea's existence, starting with South Korea's normalization relations with the Eastern Bloc countries, the collapse of the Soviet Union, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the end of the Cold War left North Korea in a fundamentally weakened position. And it's from about that time period that you begin to see a number of trends, right? This is when North Korea begins to engage in more diplomacy to mitigate pressure. One can think of the 1991 to 1992 initial high-level talks, that generated great expectations, historic documents, an apparent breakthrough in inter-Korean relations, only to be dashed when North Korea lost interest, exacted the most they could out of the engagement, and then backed off. And then it's around that same time that we see North Korea begin to really seriously move towards that path of a nuclear capability, with the original nuclear crisis being at that time. Over the ensuing decades, we've seen pivots to charm, like I mentioned, the 1991 to 92 time period with Republic of Korea, as well as the 1994, of course, agreed framework, the first, diplomatic engagement with the North of substance that led to an agreement. At the same time, we know that now, in retrospect, probably the roots of North Korea's interest in pursuing a path to uranium enrichment, allowed the North to put its plutonium on hold, allowed the North to enjoy the benefits of a somewhat improved relationship with the United States, but never taking it to the natural next level, whether it would have been in cooperating with the IAEA on clearing up doubts about their earlier reprocessing run, or setting up, liaison offices as had been called for. There was a kind of a way in which the agreed framework didn't really gain much momentum from the very beginning. Later, by the end of the 1990s and 2000s, we see another, shot at charm, another approach at engagement. And on the ROK side, we saw the Kim Jong-il summit. And then, of course, we had the first visit to North Korea, the historic visit to North Korea by then Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, as North Korea, again, turns to a charm, a kind of a quiet period. And then from 2003 onward, we begin to see North Korea again moving back and forth between periods of development of its program, advancement of its program, breaking out of the NPT, unsealing the seals on the fuel rods, restarting their reactor, and then gradually, qualitatively and quantitatively growing its program, even while engaged in various forms of dialogue. So when we get to the more current era, focusing on where we are today to kind of ask the question of where we may going forward. I had the opportunity to be in Korea from 2016 to 2020, and I feel really, as an analyst watching this issue, very, very grateful to have been there for that, because I walk into, the cutting edge, the front edge of the U.S. commitment to the Republic of Korea, which is, U.S. Forces, Korea Combined Forces Command, United Nations Command, there in Yongsan, while the North is engaged in its robust pursuit of missile capabilities in the 2016 to 2017 time period. We called it Missile a Month mania. It was no joke, however. The tensions were clearly rising on the peninsula as North Korea was moving down the path of, definitively seeking to definitively prove its capabilities to us. And it was, what was interesting, again, was in 2018, as the North began its very unique charm offensive. There are elements of what happened and transpired in 2018, both with the South and with the United States, which have a lot resemble remarkably earlier efforts. One can think of the 91 to 92 inter-Korean progress, very similar to that found in 2018, where you had the engagement, you had the high-level talks, you had the increased expectations, a talk of a wide range of economic incentive, economic projects, exchanges and cooperation, that by the end of 2018 begins to fizzle out like it had in the past. And what was interesting, and of course in 2018, we had the Singapore summit, and then Kim Jong-un beginning to engage with China. But all this took place within the context of a very interesting New Year's address in January 1st, 2018, an often forgotten one because of the ensuing events. But when you look at the importance of what Kim proclaimed in that New Year's speech, was that as he talked about helping South Korea with the Winter Olympics and making this a joint celebration of the whole Korean people, he also directed his munitions industry to spur on production, large-scale production of warheads, of nuclear warheads and missiles. In other words, a reminder that whatever was to transpire in the diplomacy over the 2018 onward period, it would be in the context of a unremitted commitment to expanding qualitatively and quantitatively its nuclear program. The Hanoi summit was an opportunity for North Korea to once again take one of the many opportunities the United States has provided it over the years. I'm reminded, and Joe, you remember back in October 2002, when Jim Kelly went into Pyongyang and confronted the North Koreans on their highly enriched uranium program and what we knew about it and what we assessed about it, and gave North Korea an opportunity to engage in dialogue about it. And after an initial kind of uncertain acknowledgement in the contact that was had, subsequent absolute denial of their HEU program, a denial that was consistent all the way up to Hanoi when you think about it, because, Kim was willing to put the Yongbyon program on the table. Everything else that we had been trying to achieve and trying to understand and have the whole scope on the program. I think of the great work, Chris, that you engaged in the 2007 and 2018 time period to get North Korea to come clean on HU, to give us the verification necessary to fully understand the program. What February 2019, to me as an analyst, demonstrated was once again North Korea was unwilling to go down, the credible path of denuclearization. And then even after that engagement between President Trump and Kim Jong-un, a later meeting in Stockholm, and a good amount of time between Hanoi and the end of the Trump administration, that North Korea, similar to what they had done with the Obama administration, similar to what they did with the Bush administration, has simply squandered away an opportunity to move forward with the United States in a better relationship. These, and when you look at this continued pattern of behavior, you come to a conclusion that at the end of the day, Pyongyang calculates, or at least the Kim regime calculates, its survival in no way is related to an improved relationship with the Republic of Korea, and is not even related to an improved relationship with the United States. I think everybody here who has sat across the table from the North Koreans and has laid out everything we've been willing to do, everything we've been willing to give, everything that North Korea could benefit from if it chose this other path, can't help but walk away, hopefully not confused as disappointed that indeed the North has been so consistent, or at least the leadership of the North has been so consistent in walking away from those possibilities. Now, we sit here in 2021 trying to understand where North Korea is. A lot of people have asked me, why haven't we seen a more aggressive response to the Biden administration, or why haven't we seen a more aggressive response to the policy review? If you wind back the clock, you remember after Hanoi, for the remainder of 2019, North Korea threatened it would take an alternative path if the United States did not change its calculus. And the US calculus being that when we talk, it needs to be about denuclearization. And when North Korea moves down the path of denuclearization, sanctions relief and pressure relief and everything else can be on the table. But that until that point, North Korea will remain in the state it is. And North Korea threatened that if we did not change our policy by the end of 2019, they would go down this new path. And then there was a dangling out of a Christmas gift, some mysterious Christmas gift that really never fully materialized. But in the opening hours of 2020, North Korea released a report from what had been a fifth plenary meeting of the party Congress, in which the North Koreans proclaimed their head-on breakthrough offensive. And in the head-on breakthrough offensive, it was really a kind of almost, if you could imagine it as a result of an internal policy review on North Korea's side, that in the aftermath of Hanoi, in the aftermath of the US unwillingness to take a small part of its program for a significant lifting of sanctions, that the North would go down a different path, and this is what the path would be. And within that head-on breakthrough offensive, it said that we, DPRK, will have to live under sanctions for this foreseeable future. We would be engaged in a protracted, arduous struggle, that the North would achieve the peace it seeks through strength, that would continue to expand its strategic capabilities, but through in a period of belt tightening and austerity, self-reliance was the key. Anybody who looked to help to the outside, anybody who had been hoping for sanctions relief from a successful Hanoi summit, anybody that had been hoping for aid and assistance from South Korea through an improvement of inter-Korean relations, is essentially a nation-selling traitor, an unbeliever in the concept of self-reliance and the proclamation by the regime that it would make breakthroughs on its own, with its own strength, in essence, isolating itself from the outside world. And what's important about the 2020, this head-on breakthrough offensive, is it sets a policy framework for the DPRK prior to the onset of COVID. Because we look at North Korea's isolation today, its closing of the borders, its unwillingness to accept aid from the outside, its isolation, we gravitate towards thinking, well, it must be COVID, anti-epidemic countermeasures that are accounting for it. In many ways, the North was already down this path of solving problems internally, seeking to achieve breakthroughs in the economy through self-reliance. COVID made not a virtue out of necessity, but it allowed the virtue to meet the necessity. So COVID allowed the regime to implement measures that would have been consistent with the policy path that they were already on. And of course, in 2021, we saw an eighth party Congress at the beginning of the year, got a lot of media coverage in the West, primarily because of its grandiose proclamation of a desire to achieve success in developing multiple reentry vehicles, hypersonic glide vehicles, nuclear-powered submarine, a long laundry list of capabilities that North Korea is obviously at various stages of progress in pursuing. That if the North does what it says, and it usually does along its own timeline again, that we can anticipate these capabilities at some point in the future. But more importantly, again, the eighth party Congress readout, which again deliberately preempted the U.S. policy review readout, laid this path out for a continued pursuit of strategic capabilities. It proclaimed that it had succeeded already in decoupling the United States from the defense of South Korea in the North's alleged claim it can hit the United States. And that going forward, it would continue to rely on its own capabilities, its own self-reliance, an almost matter-of-fact portrayal of its nuclear status. And I think in its behavior going forward, we expect to see this type of continuity. Now, let me close by saying, and I think maybe it'll open up the discussion and certainly spare all of you from me rambling on more. What has been the U.S. strategy? And there's actually each administration will characterize what it attempted to do or what it's attempting to do differently. But I think there's some unchanging principles that underlie our approach over the years. Many great men and women working this issue, great negotiators like Joe DeTrani and of course Chris Hill. And I think you would have to agree. First of all, that again, it's an epistemologically solid policy. Yeah, there were some debates on issues, in the 2000s that we grappled with, and how much risk would we have if we took a plutonium-only approach and got to the HEU later? Those were legitimate debates, but they fueled really good policy decisions. And I think again, with the North Korea issue, our failure to resolve the North Korea issue is not the result of an insufficiency of knowledge. The second thing is that we keep the alliance first. Our strength in the region is our alliances, right? It's the alliances with the Republic of Korea, with Japan, with other partners like Australia and other countries that are partnering with the United States in the region, in Northeast Asia, and on the North Korea issue. And that whatever we do with Pyongyang, and we can take some risk, we can do some creative things. Singapore was creative. We did some creative stuff during the Obama administration. Chris, I think you did an incredible job in taking the six-party talks as far as it could be taken, given North Korea's intentions. That whatever we do, we would not sacrifice our relationship with Seoul and Tokyo and others as a result. The third principle is that we keep the door open. We keep the door open. I can't recall, and I'd be willing to hear if Chris or Joe disagree too much, that there's never been a period where if the North Koreans picked up the phone and called 202-647, whatever number at State Department, that we would not be rushing to get visas to go to wherever it is they wanted to talk about. We've not chased as much, and we've not, openly kind of pursued in a way that most people, when reporters kind of get antsy, why aren't you talking to the North? Why aren't you talking to the North? We don't openly chase, and there's good, logical, negotiating, tactical reasons why you don't, but we've always been open, and there's always been off-ramps. The lack of off-ramps for Kim Jong-un has never been an obstacle to forward progress. We have made clear in all of our negotiations what it is we expect from the North, what it is we know, what it is we expect, and what benefits would accrue to the DPRK, what the carrots would be. We've arranged the carrots in different ways, in different administrations, but all we've kind of learned through all the various carrot arrangements is that Kim Jong-un is not a rabbit. And that, unfortunately, until now, and I don't want to be so deterministic to say this assessment means, there's little hope for the future. But until now, the regime just has simply not wanted to take these exit ramps. But that's why it's so important to keep the door open to that dialogue. This is why it's so important to continue to talk to the North. This is why it's so important to continue to make clear, our intentions. And until that point, of course, finally, we deter and contain. We deter and contain. And this is what is key, both for the safety and security of the people of the United States, but our close allies, allied partners in South Korea and Japan, the two countries who are the closest targets of North Korea's capabilities, that we continue to provide deterrence, we continue to provide assurance, and we continue to contain, so that no matter how this program advances, North Korea should never be deluded into thinking somehow its new capabilities provided new options through the use of force to achieve strategic objectives that have to date been elusive. Deterrence has worked for 68 years of armistice, and I have every confidence it will going forward. So with that, that's my spiel. I'd be interested to hear your questions or challenges or criticisms.
Sid, let me say I've heard a lot of cogent analyses of North Korea, but none so cogent and so brilliant as the one I just heard from you in the last 25 minutes. It was really, really excellent. I just want to commend you on that. And I think there's a reason you have been engaged with this issue for so many years through so many administrations. So thank you for that. And thank you for your service. Let me say, one of the best parts of your analysis from my point of view was something I did not hear. And that is the notion that somehow North Korea needs nuclear weapons because the US is mean to it or threatening to it, and that this is their means of survival. You suggest that they have a more ambitious palette of issues they seek through nuclear weapons, not just their survival, but their kind of perhaps membership in a kind of big boys club in the world. I wonder if you could go into a little more motivation from your perspective on why they continue to do this at the cost that you very adroitly pointed out, the cost of isolation, the cost of sanctions, et cetera. And is there anything in that motivation, ultimately in that motivation, that could make us more, maybe add some elements to policy, maybe even get rid of some elements and not say, well, we have to be nicer to them, et cetera. But I wonder if you could talk about what is their underlying desire for to have nuclear weapons. My own feeling is it has a lot to do with their view that they could somehow decouple us from Northeast Asia and kind of level the playing field in their view. But I'd really like to hear your thoughts on why ultimately do they really feel they need these weapons? And is that something that we can work with in order to have a more successful policy against their nuclear weapons?
Chris, first, thank you for those kind words. I really, coming from you, it's very, important. I think, again, your efforts during those years that you worked the issue, kind of reflected everything creative our diplomacy, U.S. diplomacy, can bring to the table. Our cooperation within the multilateral environment, working with the Chinese, so that we could create, if indeed North Korea had some type of concern about U.S. hostile policy, intent to invade, et cetera, we would create that environment within six-party talks where they could feel they had friends and partners at the table. We know the relationship with China is not as great as one would otherwise kind of by default think there would be. But, nevertheless, we tried within that context to provide that environment conducive to the North exploring what a life without nuclear weapons could look like. And the sub-working groups that we had established were kind of insurance policy. I mean, they were like a foretaste of what was to come by having a DPRK U.S. normalization working group, a DPRK Japan normalization working group, an economic and energy assistance group, and then the Northeast Asia Peace and Security mechanism. By having these, we could say there's goodies in the economic bin, there's security assurances, there's confidence building, and then there's of course that promise of the billions that would come from some type of reconciliation with Japan, and of course all the good things that would come from the relationship with the United States. One of the blessings that I've had, it seems like a curse at times, but I've been a media analyst for many of the years that I've worked North Korea, and I followed how North Korea, the narratives it seeks to create surrounding the regime, the system, North Korea's unique place in history, and most importantly of all, the justification for its nuclear program. And you think about it logically, 68 years of armistice. The United States has been on the peninsula guaranteeing peace, defending North Korea almost as much as South Korea in terms of all of the lethal and kinetic provocations, from the Burma bomb blast when a dozen or so senior cabinet members were killed as North Korean operators sought to assassinate then President Chun Doo-hwan, to the bombing of the Korean airliner, to all this history of provocations, and we've been there guaranteeing peace on the peninsula. Kim Jong-un and the North Korean people can go to bed safe at night, knowing the U.S. and ROK is not going to attack. So what is the threat that North Korea then faces? And the threat language, particularly after the collapse of the Soviet Union in the Eastern Bloc, the world in which North Korea existed, and then as it watched, its fellow Ceausescu and Romania and other socialist states collapse, the minute outside ideas and ideology and freedom entered, that's exactly the threat Kim Jong-un faces. It is the existential threat that's tied to the inherent the weakness of his anachronistic system, the political and economic vulnerabilities of the regime, and of course, ideological infiltration. I have in front of me a 2014 Nodong Shimun article on the threat of infiltration from imperialist ideology and culture. And it talked about, United States that sought to corrupt and decay and collapse all these East European countries. And the reasons why they weren't ready is because they didn't have a solid, hermetic seal around the country that prevented, the inflow of information. Other articles around the 1990s would argue about how all these states fell because the military wasn't prepared. And so what you see in North Korea is a capability that's designed to ensure the survival of the Kim regime. It's not necessarily good for the nation state, but it's not meant to be. It's meant to to protect the system and protect the regime. I think, over the past several years, first of all, just incredible efforts by our South Korean friends in the Moon Jae-in administration to try to reach out to North Korea, to try to reassure it that a forced unification by absorption was not the policy of the ROK, that we weren't out to overthrow the Kim government, that any survival concerns that it might have, can be resolved by a better relationship with the ROK. And again, it's a reminder in the rejection of that, we can make security guarantees and have a debate about how credible they are over time, and how legally obligated a country is to abide by one. But what we can never guarantee is that when information gets into North Korea and the North Korean people's desire for freedom, economic and political, and a better existence reaches a point where it boils to a challenge to the regime, there's no guarantee that can prevent that. And that's kind of the dynamic, the dilemma we face with it. So, we always go through the process of asking ourselves, how can we assuage North Korea's concerns? And I think there's certainly not much value to being overly belligerent. I think 2017 demonstrated to some degree that, Kim was pretty confident that in spite of a lot of threats and a lot of increasing tension, that the United States would ultimately not follow through on its threats. And to a degree, he was proven right. I do believe, however, though, that, Chris, what I just explained to you actually is the best case scenario, that Kim will need these weapons because he has such a sense of insecurity and inferiority, and that they are merely defensive in nature. The other alternatives would be that, emboldened by this new capability and claiming to have decoupled the United States, whether he has or not is not as important as whether he thinks he has. Whether, along the lines of what deterrence theorists call the stability instability paradox, that now that there's a nuclear capability to deter at the nuclear level, he feels a greater degree of freedom to be more aggressive and adventuresome in the conventional field, whether he'd be more inclined to see what, you remember 2010, Cheongnam sinking, Yeonpyeong shelling, what similar kinetic lethal aggression on the peninsula in the pursuit of reestablishing, like I mentioned, that dominance over South Korea, he may feel emboldened to do that. The worst case scenario is that with these capabilities, he would see a final solution to the divided peninsula. And maybe even though, one can imagine how hard it would be for a nation state that barely survives, with Kim running 20 million people, how how, whether he would pursue unification, but there are other strategic goals that he could pursue potentially if he felt confident that the United States really is decoupled and the U.S. is not committed to the defense of the Republic of Korea. And this is where, again, the strength of the alliance, our training, our extended deterrence commitments to the Republic of Korea, they continue to remain critical in deterring or discouraging Kim from thinking these are viable longer-term options. And you hit the nail on the head by raising them, Chris, because that's really where our head needs to be looking forward. Is this the path? And if it is, how will we know we're on that path? And if we assess we're on that path, or even if we don't, how do we discourage Kim from taking that path? And I think these will be key elements of our approach going forward.
Joe, let me, I was going to turn to Alex and then to you to pose some questions and maybe more of a sort of a dialogue with Sid. So Alex, let me start with you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Sid, amazing presentation. Really appreciate your insights. We're in August, of course. It's the major combined exercises are about to begin, and North Koreans put on display their carrot and stick diplomacy yet again. Last March, they tried to threaten the South Koreans and us by warning that they will terminate the comprehensive military agreement, they will disband the Committee on Peaceful Reunification of the Fatherland if the exercises are not suspended. That was the stick approach. Today, of course, they reopened the hotlines, kind of signaling a more benign attitude using the carrot approach, hoping that we will not conduct the exercises. I think this is not going to happen as they wish. And really, in my opinion, it's not about the exercises. It's about Kim's desire, essentially, to see how much mileage he can squeeze from the lame duck Moon Jae-in presidency before it leaves office next February. And in particular, whether he can use the Moon administration to get the Biden White House to lift the UN Security Council sanctions on North Korean exports of minerals and imports of refined petroleum. Now, since the Biden administration's policy increasingly looks like the strategic patience 2.0 to Kim Jong-un, I believe that he does want to change the existing status quo of the freeze for freeze, that gentleman's agreement when, they don't test and we don't conduct exercises, because the status quo is eroding. I mean, we're increasing the scale and scope of the exercises while they're testing now short-range ballistic missiles. And so the status quo does not really address the North Korean concerns. Number one, about sanctions relief, and number two, about the planned South Korean space launches, because the inter-Korean space race is an important consideration in Pyongyang. They don't want to fall behind, and the South Koreans are about to launch come this fall the space vehicles. So for Kim Jong-un to acquiesce to South Korean scheduled space launches without breaking his own ICBM test moratorium, he needs some compensation at least in terms of sanctions relief. But, if you're Kim Jong-un, you look at what China and Russia are doing. So far at the United Nations, they couldn't get any sanctions relief for him. The global pandemic also didn't warm Western hearts and couldn't soften the US opposition. So no medical exception for Kim Jong-un in terms of sanctions relief. Now we're hearing all these stories about the famine-like situation in North Korea, which might sound like the deja vu of the 1990s again. I'm very skeptical about all of that. And I don't believe that these stories will move the international community to lift sanctions in any way. So my question to you really is, if indeed Kim Jong-un wants to squeeze as much mileage as he can from the departing Moon administration before the conservatives take over in the Blue House, then do you expect any October surprise from Pyongyang? Because some people believe that, you know, if nothing happens, then and we are not yielding, not kind of satisfying his ambitions in any way or his demands, then he is likely to break his freeze pledge and double down on the ICBM testing to stay ahead of the South Korean space launches in the space race on the peninsula. Also to lure Beijing to give him more aid, and of course to compel the United States to come to the table on more favorable terms. So do you expect any October surprise from him?
Wow, there's a lot of thoughts there, Alex, and I really appreciate that. You know, I remember, I think back to 2012, after the April 13th Taepodong launch that brought down the Leap Day understanding. And, you know, we had become so accustomed to that model of Taepodong launch, some type of either Security Council resolution, presidential statement, some type of condemnation, and then a nuclear test, you know, using the UN action on the alleged legitimate space launch as the pretext or justification for the nuclear test. And at the time, you know, the North Koreans' explanation was this was not about trying to intimidate anybody. This was not about trying to prove a point to the Obama administration. We had a 100th anniversary of the birth of Kim Il-sung. We celebrated it with the Taepodong launch. And so there was a lot of kind of amazement that the North had not done that, and thought that thoughts that the North had learned its lesson and would come back to the negotiating table. You know, we were talking with the North about resuming dialogue, and you know, they wanted to wait till term 2 of the Obama was kicked off, make sure that we had that, you know, we know who the leader will be for the next 4 years, and then, you know, again, we get hit with the Taepodong launch and the nuclear test. So it's really hard to establish definitively a provocation cycle, as it were. This, you know, if they don't get what they want, then they're going to do something to get what they want. In fact, what we see with the head-on breakthrough offensive logic, as well as the Eighth Party Congress, as well as the reality the North faces today in this COVID environment, that, you know, the North has declared its completion of its deterrent. It need not prove itself to anybody. It need not live up to any expectations of outsiders. It's not on a robust, rigorously defined R&D schedule that requires them to conduct this launch of this system, this date, and then this launch of this system, another date. There's, you know, a kind of matter-of-factness to the North Korean approach, really since Hanoi, that argues in favor of them seeking to gain some type of credit over time for simply not doing anything, for simply, you know, behaving well. And so this may be a factor, coupled with the concerns of why drive up tensions, why complicate a situation that's already complicated by, as you described, the internal challenges Kim faces. You know, if you look at the past history of this issue, there's really no definitive period that we can identify where economic need or hardship internally translates into motivation at the negotiating table. In fact, North Korea, when it's weak, almost is less inclined to engage because they feel they're doing so from a position of weakness. It's interesting that, you know, in the early months of the Obama administration, North Korea cuts off food aid, necessary food aid, almost to prove to us we can live without your stinking food aid. They walk away from the Leap Day understanding, we can live without your 240,000 tons of nutritional assistance. So I spent 4.5 years in U.S. Forces Korea, where a big part of my job was providing the commander decision space by being forward leaning and predicting all the bad things, most dangerous course of action, most likely course of action. And it's valuable to a military commander to know what the range of possibilities are. But to get any more precision as to this is the next system that will be launched, and this will be the reason, this will be the date. I personally see, Kim Yo-jong's statement almost kind of designed to, in part, portray that matter of factness. We're not going to, dance to anybody's tune here. We're going to do what we're going to do when we want to do it. We didn't reopen the hotlines because we want to rush to a summit. But you do this. But you do these exercises. We told you over and over and over and over again. They reset the inter-Korea relationship. So I'd like to look at the exercises more strategic in their impact, and close by kind of referring to some work that CSIS had done a few years back that kind of explored the impact of exercises on diplomacy, and they found, like I intuitively feel, there's little impact, actual impact. There's no causality, in other words, between exercise and a downturn in diplomacy. When North Korea wants to pursue a diplomatic path, it can turn a blind eye to the exercises, maybe throw some rhetorical condemnations out, but then come right back to the table the week after the exercises are over. When they don't want to talk, we're going to hear a lot about the exercises. But in no way should we assume the exercises are actually driving what North Korea has planned.
Joe, I think you're sorry, we're not leaving you with a lot of time here, but
no problem. No problem, Chris. Sid, thank you for being here today, and thank you for your service, and thank you for your outstanding presentation. If anyone knows North Korea, knows the particulars of North Korea's nuclear program, it's Sid Seiler. So thank you, Sid, again, for all you do to get us to resolve issues with the North. Look, the few comments I have relate to what Sid was talking about, but it also incorporates, and you did mention China in your presentation, Sid. The reality, I personally think, is that Kim Jong-un, like his father Kim Jong-il and Kim Il-sung, possibly even going back to Kim Il-sung, they realize they're tethered to China. I mean, this is historical. We can go back millennia and go back. And I think there is that sense in North Korea at the leadership level, certainly, that looking to the United States may be an opportunity to balance that relationship, not to be totally dependent on a China that in many ways views them, I don't want to use the word as a vassal state, but views them as, as a state that depends on China for its economic survival. So I think there was and is an impetus here to normalize relations with the United States, but on North Korea's terms, as Sid said, and that's as a nuclear weapons state. And I think when we scroll back and look at the highly enriched uranium program, I think indeed that's exactly what they were doing. As you said, Sid, with the agreed framework, they gave up the plutonium. They put that on the table, but they had their own highly enriched, secret, highly enriched uranium program. So that indeed, if we did have a liaison office, and indeed, if it did turn into normal relations, it would be normal relations with the North Korea that had nuclear weapons, unbeknownst to us, because we didn't see that second path. Well, we discovered that second path, highly enriched uranium. And that's all on the table. And you mentioned that when you talked about the Hanoi summit, and that was a defining moment where Kim Jong-un was not prepared to discuss the alternate path to nuclear weapons. So in many ways, North Korea has been looking for both a path to a normal relationship with the United States, which would balance their total reliance on China, but also as a nuclear weapons state. And I think in the bottom of their calculus there, they feel eventually, because they didn't succeed with highly enriched uranium, but eventually the United States, and they cite Pakistan often, the United States will sort of do what we did with Pakistan. We sort of will say, okay, it's not a question of caving in. We will accept them as a nuclear weapons state. They are de facto and de jure as a nuclear weapon, and they will get both, a path to normal relations and then normal relations, and then as a nuclear weapon state. Well, North Korea knows they can't do that. They know the United States will never accept them as a nuclear weapon state, and it's complete verifiable denuclearization. And I think that's the conundrum for North Korea right now. I think we saw in the beginning with Kim Jong-un, he was a bit cool, certainly, to the Xi Jinping administration in China. And it was only until President Donald Trump took the lead and met with Kim Jong-un at Singapore, et cetera, that all of a sudden that relationship again rekindled, and then we saw a definite improvement in relations. So I think we just in the final calculus, we just have to see that North Korea has a strategy, and they possibly feel confident they will succeed in getting eventually a path to normal relations as a nuclear weapon state, and that eventually the United States will say, all right, let's sort of put it on the back burner as long as they're not having further nuclear tests, and as long as they're not launching ICBMs, maybe we can go forward. So continuation of the de facto status as a nuclear weapon state. And I think the bottom line is we know that North Korea with nuclear weapons would, and I think there is consensus, would lend itself to instability in the region. I don't think South Korea, I don't think Japan is just going to sit there and say, okay, North Korea has nuclear weapons, and we could just rely totally on the US extended deterrence capabilities and commitments and so forth. We may see a surge in a sprint to other countries seeking nuclear weapons. And that's, and then also the proliferation issue with North Korea having it. So Sid, it's not really a question, but it's a long way of saying this is a complex issue. It's a very difficult issue. You're working in, and the team is working it extremely well. But if I did have a question, let me ask this. If North Korea believes that eventually the US will cave and do what we did with Pakistan and accept them as a nuclear weapon state, what would your message be to the international community? Could you ever envision the United States accepting North Korea as a nuclear weapon state?
Yeah, Joe, it's a great question, and it explains why that it is so critical to adhere to whatever you're willing to call it, whether it's fully verifiable, denuclearization or CVID or what have you. That accepting a nuclear North Korea, it has so many secondary and tertiary effects. Not the least of which is it is an abandonment of an ally with the Republic of Korea. It is a proclamation that we have given up on our global non-proliferation principles. It is a signal to other aspirants who are thinking, should we or shouldn't we, that they can get away with it. So, this is why, I was the last person to have the title that you had the first. You were the first one, the special envoy for six-party talks, and why we kept that well into years after the six-party talks had expired, because guess what? There's still great value to that magnificent document Chris Hill negotiated in the September 19th, 2005 joint statement. There's great value in maintaining that line that we cannot accept a nuclear North Korea. And if I stay away from being a policymaker, because I'm here as an intel person, let me say that North Korea is looking to the world, and it's significant. It's frustrating for Kim. I think it's frustrating for Kim that he's not gotten that green light completely from either China or Russia. That wink, wink, we accept you now. And this is why building and maintaining that international consensus around the need for North Korea to denuclearize is not a feckless utopian Don Quixote pursuit, but it is crucial to containing this issue and providing the possibility that Kim, one day down the road, will finally take one of these off ramps that we are offering him, and he'll take the right off ramp. And so, Joe, I think your passion for this issue has been demonstrated throughout the years I've known you, and it's a passion that we all should continue to have going forward.
Sid, I just want to thank you. First of all, thank you for those kind of optimistic remarks as we consider this future, which is full of unknowns. But I completely agree with you. The international community, especially North Korea's neighborhood, will just not accept the idea that North Korea can be a nuclear state. I think we do need to keep in mind that Pakistan had its own dynamic with India, but what North Korea is claiming is it has a dynamic with the United States, and I just can't see the U.S. ever changing its policy. So the issue will continue to be, how do we arrange for a set of incentives and a set of factors that will make North Korea understand they have a better future without these weapons than they do with these weapons, or whether it takes for another change of their leadership. It's hard to say, but I think what is clear is we have to stay true and close to our friends in the region. So with those concluding thoughts, let me turn it over to Dr. Michael Jenkins for a few last some words.
Thank you, Ambassador Hill, and thank you, Dr. Mansourov and Ambassador DeTrani, and special thanks to our special guest today, Mr. Sid Seiler. Ambassador Hill, you did a wonderful job, as always, as moderator with your vast experience in the six-party talks. And also, we would like to invite our audience to come every first Tuesday at 2 p.m., where we will seek to convene this kind of discussion with the best experts in the world on the topic of North and South Korea reunification, and so forth. I want to thank our sponsors, the Washington Times Foundation, the Universal Peace Federation. We look forward to seeing you next month in September, on the first Tuesday of September. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you too.